My name is Alexander Lichak. Our project, Liberation of Human Destiny, for which we will soon release a film on Netflix, presents an overview of the most important events. Russian troops continue their advance in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine has been adopting a strategy of minimal losses, constantly retreating over the past 2 months. The next point of resistance is Pokrovsk, a city referred to as the Western Gate of the Ukrainian Donbass. The retreat is, of course, due to insufficient weaponry. Meanwhile, politicians in Europe and the USA are calling for a reduction in the draft age in Ukraine. President Zelensky responded that there is no point in doing this because there is nothing to arm them with. How to stop the war in 24 hours is something President Trump and his entourage do not know. Macron flew to Warsaw to discuss a peacekeeping mission, which he called the main topic of his conversation with Polish Prime Minister Tusk. After the meeting, he publicly assured the Poles and calmed them down, stating that there is no talk of introducing Polish troops into Ukraine for now. Polish social media exploded with posts saying that Poland is full of Ukrainians, so they should go fight. In contrast, Ukrainians rightly noted in the same social media that little Poland will be next and no one will come to its aid. It is better to help Ukraine now. The weakness of Polish politicians and those of other European countries at the border, like Romania, continues to be evident as they remain silent and watch even after missiles have hit their territory. They could at least close the skies over western Ukraine instead of allowing strikes in Uzhhorod that resulted in dozens of civilian casualties. The shame that Europeans live with is incomprehensible to Ukrainians. Instead, they fear a new missile from Putin, which brings nothing new, while Western politicians and journalists skillfully pick up on propaganda narratives and spread them in the news. Everyone is counting how many people will die in Berlin, Warsaw, and Milan if this new missile lands there. Zelensky, as always, tells jokes his past as a comedian does not let him rest. The direct statement, NATO is at war with Russia, seriously? Yes, and what? What's happening there? 700,000 Russians have already died. All the missiles have been used up. A lot of their equipment has been burned. What are you talking about? And NATO, what? NATO hasn't even entered the war yet. Now the situation is diametrically opposite. The Western Hemisphere is negotiating peace while the war has not yet ended. In negotiations, the Kremlin shows all signs of being uninterested, primarily due to their bought journalist Carlson. Meanwhile, Ukraine is receiving less and less weaponry and is retreating while Europe is busy with things that do not matter. In America, there is a dilemma. The drama surrounding Donald Trump's second coming was already sufficient reason for him to appear on the cover of Time magazine as Person of the Year for the second time this week. He first became Person of the Year when he won the elections in 2016. In 2022, Zelensky and the spirit of Ukraine graced the cover of Time as symbols of resistance and resilience of the nation. Trump's son, Donald Jr., posted a video in which his father kicks the president of Ukraine off the cover. Trump Jr. posted such a video, skipping over the tabloid heroine of last year, the mega-popular singer Taylor Swift, perhaps because young Trump has 7 million followers on Instagram, while Taylor Swift has 283 million. He was probably afraid to kick a star. This caused a sensation in Ukraine, especially the article by Trump that was published and recorded in mid-November. He stated that the administration should not have allowed Ukrainians to hit deep into Russia, refused to answer whether he spoke with Putin after the elections, and called the Middle East. We can observe that Trump is an absolutely unpredictable person, and even he probably does not know what his position will be on the day he enters the room. For Europe, such a president in the USA is a threat. In Ukraine, incredible events are happening at the same time. Another character who ended up this week among the most influential people in the world is Andriy Yermak, head of the president's office. He is alongside Orban, the Pope, and Sikorsky in the list of the most influential people in Europe by Politico. A former television producer and seller managing kiosks, Without formal power, he has concentrated all real power in Ukraine. The Grey Cardinal is viewed with hostility by a large part of civil society, but if you want to talk to Kyiv, you must talk to Yermak, as Politico describes the nature of the influence of Zelensky's closest ally. This week, Yermak gave an interview to the public broadcaster. He was asked not about why the head of the presidential office became the main figure in Ukraine, but about how he lives with this crown. Regarding his visit to the USA, he says that he failed to meet with the US Special Representative for Ukraine. It becomes unclear why he flew there then. Of course, he praised Zelensky several times for solving the military problems that have not been resolved for years regarding the transfer of troops from one regiment to another. Why is it important to talk about this character Yermak? The most influential person in Europe is not asked by the controlled media about the unjust mobilization, about the poor quality of mines and fortifications, the lack of drones at the front, the permanent scandal around the Ministry of Defense about squeezing Kubrakov and Fedorov from the president's inner circle, which is considered a result of Yermak's jealousy, and about the prosecutor general who was dismissed 45 days ago and has not yet been replaced, about the outcome of the checks on the prosecutors of the disabled and how many millions they have stolen from the budget over the years, about the fake certificates that allowed more than 3 dozen deputies and officials suspected of corruption to flee abroad. Such an interview with Yermak, one of the most influential people in Europe, gathers less than 12,000 views on YouTube in one day. This speaks of absolute disrespect and indifference towards this man by the entire Ukrainian people, although this is the very problem that needs the most attention. The scandalous trials involving a few top corrupt officials and one oligarch are a circus show. When a clown becomes president, the kingdom turns into a circus. There are simply limitless investigations in Ukraine, but it all goes nowhere because the judicial system is maximally corrupt and ineffective, while at the same time, most small entrepreneurs in Ukraine are facing fabricated criminal cases to intimidate people. Thousands of civil servants continue to undermine the country from within. This power would have long since sold us to Russia, and everything holds only on the money of the Ukrainian people who donate their last, and of course, the heroism of those simple Ukrainians who fight. Because the police and military did not go to war, they protect the power from a coup by terrorizing the population within the country. The truth that is unknown in Europe, where they consider Zelensky a hero, while in Ukraine he is already hated. The small portion of aid that reaches the country is insufficient after it has been embezzled. Those who embezzled this aid, as in Dnipro, Zelensky even rewarded. For example, now during the war, the Verkhovna Rada decided to vote on changing the green color on traffic lights to emerald, while local authorities in Vinnytsia and throughout the country continue to replace freshly laid asphalt to carry out the obvious and yet another massive money laundering. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian people fight, die, and uncover the tragedy of the Soviet approach to war by higher command and colonels who have never been in battle. An interview with Sergeant Marcus about command and the Ukrainian army from the inside and about the advance and invasion of Russia sparked a scandal in Ukraine. Those sergeants who are at the front lines are fighting alone and trying to change brigade actions at the sergeant level directly on the battlefield. The vertical is incorrectly structured. Yermak and the President's office, along with the President himself, are involved in all processes, including the adventure regarding Kursk. In our country, the President lives in his own illusions, while the real power lies with the Secretary, who controls almost all the business of all oligarchs, especially those who worked for Russia, and all the oil and gas transit that they continue to pump from Russia, calling it Azerbaijani. They think they will be in power forever, just as Yanukovych once thought, and their power. By the way, almost the entire apparatus of Yanukovych is now with Zelensky. So the revenge of pro-Russian forces against the revolution has occurred. By undermining the army, they are selling Ukraine and the Ukrainian people to Russia, who heroically died for the freedom of Ukraine and the values of Europe in the fight between good and evil and terrorism, regardless of the power and its actions in the rear. The Ukrainian people dream of a ceasefire to hold elections and change this government. In their wisdom, the Ukrainian people remain patient without making a revolution. But if elections do not happen in the next 6 months, I predict there will be a military coup supported by the entire Ukraine, and that would be correct. In Israel, there has long been war and elections happening at the same time. The task of everyone in the world is to force the Ukrainian government to hold elections despite the war, if it is not possible to stop the war for some time. For Putin, the KGB, and Russia, this is just a temporary pause, and they are counting on it too. The Central Bank of Russia announced a rise in interest rates to a record 21% to curb inflation. The ruble is depreciating, oil prices are falling, and the strategic front of national prosperity is being depleted, with liquid assets dropping to a 16-year low. The long-awaited rise in oil prices is still not happening. The surplus of oil in the world in 2025 is pulling down 1 and 3 million barrels a day. Rosneft's head, Sechin, tells Putin to prepare for the fact that a barrel of Russian oil may cost $45 to $50 next year, adjusted for inflation. This corresponds to the numbers that led to the bankruptcy of the Soviet Union, writes the Telegraph. Few predict its sudden complete collapse, but all signs of decline lie on the surface. Putin's regime has not yet reached this point, but it may only take one more change in the Middle East to finish the job. If Saudi Arabia decides again to flood the world with cheap raw materials and regain market share as many predict, then oil prices per barrel may fall below $40, and the Russian economy will become uncontrollable. The war in Ukraine could end precisely because of this. Catastrophic consequences for Russia, and holding on now with the last of their strength, could mean the destruction of this wheel on clay feet, and the Putin regime could fall as quickly as the regime of his Syrian puppet Assad fell in 11 days. And if Europeans at least fulfilled 50% of what they promised, Ukrainians would have the opportunity to at least fight on equal terms. And if there were more weapons from all allies, which should have been according to the Budapest Memorandum, Ukrainians would have already reached Moscow and overthrown Putin. 10 years of war and all eyes are closed, or this is the plan of those who initiated it all. Learn more in the description below the video, and in a few months, the film project on Indiegogo will be launched if we have enough subscribers, meaning those willing to support the project. Everything is in our hands, and the future now depends on each of us. The world we dreamed of as children should be completely different, and all of this is a terrible nightmare where only injustice exists and everything is heading nowhere. For the sake of your future and your family, understand this, and let's earn together and change this world. We will become equal participants in the war for this world between the powerful of this world, and we will win this struggle. Let's return to the local One Direction war in Ukraine. Of course, if Ukraine had the strength to turn the tide of the war and reclaim and destroy Russia, no one knows how much strength Russia has left, and unfortunately, everyone wants peace, while Russia is probably hoping that with its last strength, it can maintain what it has conquered. Unfortunately, all the narrow-minded, especially Trump and America. America is completely deaf. Everyone in Europe knows how detached American society has long been from reality, for which they will soon pay the price when China wins the economic war, and Russia, with China's support, will attack Europe in 10 years if there is peace now, where each country has a couple of million people, and will conquer all of Europe